All right. So tonight we begin the very, very famous and much talked about section of Sefer Mada, the first book of the Yad HaChazakah, the 14 sections that the Rambam codified um, into law. And we spoke about Hilchos Deos, which was basically how to act. And now the Rambam shifts his attention to Hilchos Talmud Torah, which is very, very, very expansive with many, many laws that discuss everything from who has to learn Torah, who can't learn Torah, who should learn, and then it goes on and on, and he speaks about the education system. And there's many, many, many smatterings of passages throughout Shas that the Rambam collects into this specific section of Hilchos Talmud Torah. And even the beginning, the very, very first halacha is also unique because the Rambam starts off by saying, and we'll learn it right now, Nashim va'avadim muktanim p'turim mitalmud Torah. Okay, the first word of the first law in the first chapter talks about women. So all women who are presently on the Zoom are allowed to leave right now because they're not obligated. Okay, and much ink was spilt, many books, classes, courses, symposiums, all to discuss this particular Rambam about why women are patur. What does that mean? Why does he have to go out of his way to tell you, which is very rare? The Rambam usually discusses the mitzvah. Then, somewhere down along the line, he'll tell you who's exempt. But the very first halacha in the very first perek, he talks about the exemptions. So we're just going to try to learn, very pashut, as they say, without getting into it. But there is so much that can be peeled from these layers. I just want to, I want everyone to keep that in the background. But because it's only meant for 15 minutes and we're, meant to learn this Bikiyas, I'll try to keep everything, pretty simple. So that being said, women, avadim, okay, an eved is a eved Kanani, okay, as opposed to an eved ivri. An eved ivri is a regular run-of-the-mill Jew that became an eved. An eved Kanani is a non-Jewish slave. We've had this many, many times. But just for brief chazara, is a non-Jewish slave that has mitzvot like a woman. Okay, that's how it works. We learn in Gzeira Shava. It's called La La Meisha, famous Gzeira Shava that says that a Eved Kanani is equal to the status of a woman regarding halacha, regarding mitzvos. Okay, so that's the story of an Eved Kanani. Ukitanim, minors, under 13 if you're a male, under 12 if you're a female, they are technically patur from learning Torah. So that leaves, according to my math, about 40% left. If you do the math, 35 or 40% left of the Jewish world are functioning males above the age of 13. Okay, so they are chayav. Okay, in learning in the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Talmud Torah is not just a nice thing that you do if you have time, if you don't have pressure, if you're relaxed. It is, believe it or not, it is a chiyuv. So when we learn every single night, it's not that it's a nice thing to do, but we all have an obligation. Okay, just like we have an obligation to, if you're a male, to put on tefillin and to sit in a sukkah and to do all the other mitzvos that we have to do. Talmud Torah is it's a biggie, granted, with many, 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 aspects and layers, but nevertheless, it is one of the 613 mitzvos, at least one, probably more. Okay, so that's the story of Nashim Avadim Uktanim. Again, Rambam is very unique that he starts off by telling you who doesn't have to. as opposed to who does have to. Aval katan avav chayav lamdu Torah. So now we're ready. The Rambam goes right into it regarding a katan. Okay, forget a nashim and avadim for a second. Now we're going to focus on a katan. When it comes to a katan, avav chayav lamdu Torah, even though he's technically under 13, als chinuch. Okay, chinuch, a very, very big topic. What is chinuch? Okay, literally it means education. It's what we pay our school system to do. That is called chinuch. So ideally, in a perfect world, or I should say before schools were invented, it's the father, and the Rambam is going to go into the history in depth. I could promise you that. But in theory, the father has an obligation to teach his young sons Torah. Okay, very, very basic precept. Shenemar v'limadata mosam es benechem l'daber bam. A pasuk we all know, very familiar in Shema, that basically says that we have to teach our b'nechem, okay, our sons. So that takes care of the father's obligation vis-a-vis his sons. Okay, ve'ein ha'isha chayeves lamed as bina. On the other hand, technically, a woman doesn't have to. So the Rambam's trying to like kill a few birds with one stone over here. From this one clause of we have the obligation of the father. So to his son. Now let's talk about the mother. The problem with the mother, not the problem, sorry to say that. The reality is that the mother, says the Rambam, is not chayeves alamed es bena. She doesn't have the obligation to teach her son. Why not? Because the rule is shekol hachayev lilmod chayev l'lamed. Right? This is a very, very famous Gemara in Kiddushin, Daf Chavtes, Daf Lamed, that talks about the mitzvos that the child has. The mitzvos that the parents have on the child, and it digresses into Talmud Torah, and that whole area Chavtes Lamed Lamed Aleph Lamed Beis talks about mitzvos sheyazman grama, and the Rambam virtually takes this line from the Gemara in Kiddushin. I'll quote it exactly. It's on Daf Chavtes Amud Beis. It says, "Olam do Torah minolan dechsiv limadatem esbenechem vehechad." Excuse me. V'limadatem v'limadatem shekol mitzvah lilmod mitzvah lalamed v'chol she'enu mitzvah lilmod enu mitzvah lalamed. The woman does not have an obligation to learn. So because she herself, the Gemara on Daf Chavtes Amud Beis says in Kiddushin that she herself is not mechayeves. So how could someone who themselves aren't chayev be responsible and be obligated to teach someone else? Right? It doesn't make sense. It's kind of like the Kiddush on Shabbos, right? A woman, debatable whether she's chayev, right? She can't be motzi others because she herself is not mechuyeves. So therefore, you can't be yotzei someone else if you yourself are exempt. That, in a real big nutshell, is the source that the Rambam uses, and he takes it right out of the Gemara, like we said, in Kiddushin Daf Chavtes Amud Beis. Okay, so that's how the Rambam at least starts off. Now we're not going to talk about if women are patur, then why do they do it? It's very tempting. Like I said, you could spend literally hours talking about this and the Gemara and Sota and various other sources. I'll try not to go all over the place, as tempting as it is. So we'll forge ahead. Number 2, Kishem shechayev adam l'lamed as beno, kachu chayev lamed as ben beno. So this is a shout out to all the grandparents out there who have grandchildren, and says that just like you have to teach Torah to your son, the identical chiyuv is teaching your grandson. Shenemar b'hodadatem levanecha ulvnei banecha. Right? The pasuk says that you should make it known to your children's. That's doesn't get much clearer than that. V'lo beno uven beno bilvad. Not only your son and your son's sons, ela mitzvah al kol chacham v'chacham Yisrael alamed es kol talmidim, afal pi she'ein an banav. even though, even right, this is a line from Rav Meir Shapiro. What they spoke about him, he didn't have any children, but he felt like his institution of Daf Yomi, everyone became his Talmidim. This is exactly what the Rambam is referring to over here, where he says that it's incumbent on every Chacham in every generation to set up a yeshiva of some sort and to have Talmidim, even though they technically are not their children. Shenemar v'shinantim levanecha. Now, what does that mean? That means you should teach your children. But the Rambam says, Mipi Shmuel lamdu banecha elu talmidecha. Right? It's not literally, it could be literally your children, but it's even referring to your Talmidim. Sheha Talmidim kruyim banim. Because Talmud, your students are as equally loved, right? You speak to some teachers, they'll tell them, right? They'll say that they treat they feel like their students are tantamount to their children, right? Any good teacher will tell you that. So that's what the Rambam says. Talmidim are called banim. How do you know? Pasuk in Malachim that says Vayetzu b'nei hanaviim. It says that the sons of the prophet went out. Im ken lama nitztava al beno v'al ben beno. So if that's true, that Talmidim are equivalent. So why are we harping on this commandment of grandchildren? Right? That's how the Rambam starts. You have to teach your children and your grandchildren. So why do they get precedent? Im ken lama nitztava al beno v'al ben beno. V'akten beno ben beno, ben beno ben chavero. So the question is, what if you have two people vying to be taught? Right? This should be everyone's problem in life, right? You have your grandson wants to learn with you, and you have someone else's son who you know wants to learn with you, and you're a grandfather. So who do you pick first? Halavai, we should all have these problems. So the Rambam says, go after your own grandchildren. They take precedent to someone who's not technically related to you. Okay, that's number 2. Number 3, v'chayav liskor melamed libno l'lamdo. So now we're going to almost get to it. Actually, the second parak, the Rambam is going to get to the whole education system and how it all started, right? The Gemara Bava Basra, if you remember. But here the Rambam just alludes to it a little. He says, not only do you have to teach your children, but v'chayav liskor melamed livno l'lamdo. You're obligated to hire a melamed, to hire a rebbe, okay, for your own son. However, and it's a little confusing. So on the one hand, if for whatever reason the father can't, so he has to make sure that his son learns somehow. So he has to hire a private rebbe. But ve'eno chayev l'lamed es ben chaveru ella b'chinam. While I'm not required to teach my acquaintances or my chaver's son or someone who I know to teach for, meaning if I want to volunteer, right? Someone asks me to learn with their son, right? To help them out. I'm not allowed to charge. That has to be b'chinam. So it's a little strange. On the one hand, I have to hire someone for money to pay for my own student, to pay for my own kid. But when it comes to my friend's kid, if he wants to ask me, he can't ask me for money. Okay, we're gonna discuss that later on. Mishalo limdo, and it seems like the Rambam's a little bit, all over the place, but let's just learn it the way it's written. Mishalo limdo aviv chayav limdo das atzmo kishiyakir. What happens if somebody was neglected by their father, okay? And he's like, okay, my father never taught me. My father didn't have money to have someone teach me. Do I have to go the rest of my life, okay, without learning Torah? The answer is no. You have to teach yourself kishayakir. Interesting word. It literally means, yakir means to recognize, but it means when you could recognize, literally, when you could understand. Okay, shenemar v'ulamadatem osam ushmartem la'asotam. Okay, you should study. Okay, to take, right, la'asotam, to perform. Okay, so that means that you have to perform in life. You have to act properly. The only way you're going to get to that level is through education. So you can't say, well, I'm not going to get to that level because I was never educated. And because I was never educated, I'm never going to educate myself. It has to start with you. This is a little bit similar to the bris, right? The mitzvah is on the father. If the father doesn't give you a bris, you can't go the rest of your life, right? Eventually, when you turn 13, the mitzvah is on you. You have to make sure, if your parents neglected you or didn't want to pay or whatever reason, right? You were living in Switzerland where they didn't allow you. The bottom line is you have to go and get your own bris. So too over here, you have to go and educate yourself. And based on that last pasuk, the Rambam says, "V'chen atamotu b'chol makom she'atalmud kodem l'maisa." So it says ulamadatem, then it says ushmartem la'asotam, right? What do you do first? So the Rambam says that you find in any place that the Talmud, which is studying and education, takes precedence over maisa, over actions, over your deeds. Why? Mipnei she'haTalmud mevi lidei maisa, ve'ein ha'maisa mevi lidei Talmud. Very, very famous line that says that it's a little bit chicken egg, meaning you have to do good deeds and you have to be educated. The question is, which comes first? Which one is a cause or a correlation of the other one? So the Gemara says, I'll just quote it. It's a very famous Gemara at the end of the first chapter in Kiddushin. If you remember Daf Mem, right, that's where the parak ends. It says, Talmud Gadol o Maisa Gadol. What is greater, study or action? So the Gemara, and this is exactly where the Rambam got this almost word for word. Nena Rav Tarfon v'omer Maisa Gadol, Nena Rabbi Kiva v'omer Talmud Gadol. You have to first educate yourself in order to understand what the proper way of acting is. Right? Nanu kulam va'amru Talmud Gadol Talmud mevi lidei Maisa. The answer is it's two halves of one whole, but you have to get to the Talmud first, because the Talmud, when you study, you know how to behave and you know the rules. So it's almost like you can't play the game because you're not going to understand the rules until you first learn the rules. Then you're going to know how to behave. So that's what it's called, Talmud mevi lidei Maisa. Okay, we will. I think there's a yeshiva called Medrash Umaisa, right? So that's where this came from. Talmud Mevi Lidei Maisa, and on that note, we will.